If you have been told that you can't read hard books, then I am here to tell you that you have been lied to. Because of the way that we teach kids in school, the way that we don't emphasize reading novels or analyzing whole texts anymore, many people walk away with the impression that the only people who read books, and especially books that we consider hard or difficult, are some special class of really smart people. And I don't think that is true at all. So I'm going to walk you through some steps on how you can start reading hard books. I also have a few other videos on the subject, by the way. If you're interested in that, there is a playlist down below. Step 1 is to pick the book. In this video, I'm not going to tell you which books you need to read. I make plenty of book suggestions, and so does just about everybody else on the internet. And you especially shouldn't feel like you need to go and find what you think is the hardest possible book to read. Instead, what I want you to do is to find a book that you think would be a challenge for you where you are right now in your reading journey. The point here is not to try so hard on the most difficult book and then immediately burn out. While it's good to push yourself, reading is also a source of joy and pleasure. And if you push yourself too hard, too quickly, I do have this worry that you'll end up hating it. And we don't want that. So pick the right book for you. And remember to pick a book that actually interests you. Don't just pick a book because you found it on a list. Don't pick a book because you've been told that Western civilization is going to collapse because not enough people are reading Homer. Pick a book that you think has a decent chance of maintaining your interest and that you think is going to be a little bit of a challenge. That's all we're looking for right now. Now, this is step 1.5. It is optional. It is to get a buddy. I think one of the best ways you can get yourself into reading more difficult books is to learn that a lot of the joy of reading is actually the joy of discussing what you have read. So in some cases, actually, the reading itself might not be that pleasant, but when you get to talk about the big ideas with people whose company you enjoy, and you get to really dive deep into things and you get to discover things that you missed the first time. It's when you're engaged in those sorts of discussions that you unlock a lot of the value and the pleasure in reading difficult books. By the way, I have been doing a read along of the Nicomachean Ethics over on my Substack. There's a link down below that I think a lot of people would be really, really interested in. If you're interested in seeing what it's like to go chapter by chapter through a book, we've been doing Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Just this week, I published on book 3, so we're fairly early and it wouldn't be too hard for you to catch up. So we've picked our book. We've possibly found some friends to discuss the book with. We're going to move on to step 2. But before we do that, I want to take a moment and thank today's sponsor, Babbel. So if you look at my bookshelf, you're going to notice that there are a lot of German authors on there. I've got Nietzsche, Hegel, Heidegger, Wittgenstein, a lot of German philosophers. But you'll also notice that all of them are in English. I'm reading them all in translation, and that's because I don't speak German, but it's something that I've realized I really should do just given the philosophers that I like to read. And so I started using Babbel to help me learn German. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world, and Babbel can help you start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. And if you use my link below, you'll get 60% off your Babbel subscription. When you get started, the app will ask you some questions about how much you already know about the language, and from there, it'll design a learning plan for you that's tailored to your actual needs. I like the fact that it reminds me to review vocabulary. Even if I'm still learning basic phrases like danke and tschüss and ich bin Jared, I need to review. They also have a podcast section so you can learn more and you can read along with transcripts too. This will get you familiar with hearing whatever language it is that you're trying to learn. Thanks again to Babbel for sponsoring this video, and remember to use that link down below to get 60% off your subscription. Step 2 for reading a hard book is to give up. And what I mean by this is to give up on understanding the book completely on your first read. The kinds of books that I think are the most worth reading, the kinds of books that I think you'll get the most out of in the long run, and that you'll actually enjoy reading the most, are the sorts of books that you need to revisit multiple times in order to understand them. And it's important here for you to know that this is how experts feel about the books that they love. When I was in graduate school, I had a professor whose almost his entire career had been based on one book, reading, interpreting, and figuring out the issues in Hume's Treatise of Human Nature. The way he could talk about this book was like this book was this old friend that he was still always learning something about. A lot of these great books are a lot like that. So if you go in expecting as a total beginner to just understand them completely, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're actually assuming that you're going to do a better job than the people who have dedicated their entire lives to reading these books. So just give up on fully understanding it and just focus on trying to learn something. Step 3 is to actually get reading. I think that when people talk about reading hard books, they start to think that they need to set up an ideal reading environment. And so that means that they're going to find a really great chair to read in, or a really quiet environment, or they're going to go to a coffee shop where they think they can read for a few hours and really hunker down at a table in the corner. And I think that there is some value in finding a good environment to read in. But the big danger you run into is actually that if things aren't exactly right, they're not perfect, you're actually not going to do any of the reading. Instead, take that hard book and carry it with you everywhere you go. Try to read a page at a time when you can, while you're waiting for the bus, while you're waiting for the doctor. Instead of looking at your phone, read a page of the book. I bet a lot of you are thinking about a big book, let's say War and Peace. And one of the things that makes War and Peace so difficult is simply the fact that it's really long. But if you get in the habit of reading all the time, reading just a page when you can, and then dedicating that special time to go deeper and to read more in prolonged bursts, well, then you're going to be able to read War and Peace. You're going to be able to do it. It's as simple as that. There's a lot of advice online on YouTube about how to read more books, and I've talked about it too. It's in that playlist I mentioned before. But I really think that the best piece of advice that I've ever given about reading more on this channel is to simply make time for it. It's to put away other distractions and to make it easier for you to read books. Just carrying your book with you and getting used to picking it up and reading it whenever you can, I think that's going to help quite a bit. When you're reading, you're going to want to probably take some notes. There is a temptation here for notes to be too complex. This is a common beginner mistake. You will see a page that has been completely underlined. Every single sentence is underlined. And in my mind, that is the equivalent of having not taken any notes at all. Notes are good. Too much of a good thing can be counterproductive. So I would say take a pencil. You want to use a pencil, not a pen. Circle words that you don't understand. Maybe make a little star in the margins to say that this is an important passage. Write a question mark near passages that you think you need to go back over later. I would keep my notes at this stage really minimal. These sorts of notes are really flags for my future self to say at some point I need to come back and try my best to actually understand what is going on here. I would also encourage you not at this point to be using an app. If you want to put your notes anywhere, carry a little notebook with you. The reason I say to avoid using an app here isn't because I think handwritten notes are automatically superior, though there is some evidence that writing notes by hand does help with information retention. It's actually just that when you use an app, you're going to open up your phone or you're going to use your laptop. And since we're trying to cut down on distractions and focus on reading, you want to avoid that. This also means that there are going to be words that you don't understand. And that's why I told you to circle them. And I think that you should just go after you've read a couple of passages or you've done your reading for the day, and you should just look up those words in a dictionary. If you really want to keep a dictionary by you while you read, that's great, but it's hard to carry a dictionary everywhere. But I would just say, go look for the words later. Circle them now, look them up later. You still build your vocabulary and it helps you better understand the text, but you're not distracting yourself from actually just reading the book. So much of what we do when we talk about reading or when we talk about anything is actually just distracting us from doing the thing that we wanted to do in the first place. You're here to learn about how to read hard books. Don't let complex note-taking or any of that stuff get in the way of actually trying to read the hard books. Step 4 is to write down your thoughts. I like to use a notebook for this, but at this stage you could use an app because you're doing this when you're already done reading. You've read for the day, you've read a big section of whatever book it is that you're reading, and you need to write down your thoughts. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, just writing about what you just read is going to help you remember things. Personally, when I read fiction, I really struggle to remember character names. When I read philosophy, I don't have to worry about character names. But writing a little bit about the book that I just read can help me remember those names. That's especially useful if you're reading, say, a work by Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, because there are so many nicknames for all the characters. If you're reading, let's say, a work of philosophy, it helps you to figure out what it is that you just read and what the hell the philosopher is talking about. So if you're reading a novel, write about what just happened, who did what, who said what to whom, that sort of thing. If you're reading a work of philosophy or other nonfiction, write about the topic of the passage or the chapter or the section that you just read. but also write the author's thesis. What is the main point that they're trying to argue for? This is also a great time to go back and look up the definitions of those words that you didn't understand. I like to then actually write the definitions down in my notebook. This lets me process it a little bit for myself, and so that way I can remember special terminology. This is also a really good time, if you're interested, to consult secondary resources. For novels, there are not that many that I would recommend. I would absolutely advise you not to look at a summary of the novel. Summaries of novels do not teach you anything. Summaries of novels are there for people who don't want to read the book. If you're reading something else, again, let's use philosophy as an example, you can usually find helpful resources, commentaries, or in the case of a lot of philosophy, whether that's philosophical topics or the philosophers in question, my favorite resource is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's totally free. It's written at a fairly advanced level, but it's open to everybody, and it could help you answer those basic questions. And that could also help you understand that technical terminology, which is not always answerable just by looking at it in the dictionary. I would not trust a dictionary for the definition of philosophical jargon. Figuring out what that means is going to be work that you have to do on your own. This is also a good time for you to check in with that discussion buddy if you have one. If you were following along in my read along about the Nicomachean Ethics over on Substack, this would be a time to maybe engage in the comment section and ask some questions and try to answer other people's questions. Once you've had those discussions, bring those thoughts into your notebook too. And you should also flag things that you still don't understand, because maybe one day you're going to come and read that book a second time or a third time, and you can look back at those notes and you'll be able to answer those questions a year or two or a decade later. Step 5 is evaluate. What I mean by this is that at some point you might want to give up. And I don't believe that you have an obligation to continue reading a book that you absolutely hate or that you now consider to be worthless. But I would say set a certain minimum number of pages or a certain section you want to finish in the book before you let yourself decide to stop. Because if the book is hard for you, it is going to be a bit of a challenge. It might not be totally fun all the time. It's going to take a little bit of work, and we naturally want to quit those sorts of things. So set your goal and say, once I reach to 100 pages, I can ask myself, do I want to continue? Ask questions like, is this just too hard for me right now? Sometimes you will discover that some books are a little too hard for you right now, but a year later, they might not be. Maybe you need to go read some other books or just build up those reading muscles more. It might also be that this is just not the right time for you to read it. You thought it was going to be about one topic because that's the topic that's really interesting you right now, but you've discovered that that's not what it's about. Well, in that case, you can go and read a different book. So as long as you're being honest with yourself there and you're being critical both about the text and about your reading practice, I think it's fine to evaluate at a certain stage and ask if you want to keep reading it. It seems like a appearance from a cat is becoming obligatory in my videos these days. So here's Carl. And then step 6 is repeat. You're going to repeat all of these steps until you finish the book. You're going to repeat these steps when you decide to read the book again, and you're going to repeat these steps as you go and read other books into the future. None of the things I've talked about are quick tips or hacks, and that's because when it comes to reading hard books or to really doing anything hard, there are no quick tips. There are no hacks. It's a skill that you have to develop. But by trying to break it down into manageable steps, to thinking through the process a little bit, I hope I can make it a little less intimidating, and I can set you up for success as you go read those books that you've always wanted to read or you've thought might be good to read, but for some reason you've just never gotten around to. All right, I hope you got something out of this, and I'll talk to you soon.